Alright, so in this video we're going to learn how to solve quadratic equations by completing the square. So I have the steps here. First you want to write x squared plus bx equals c. So basically you want to move your c or your constant to the right hand side. Alright. Then you're going to find b over 2 squared. So in this case my c would be 15 and my b is 14 because remember the number in front of your x term is your b and c is your constant. Alright. Whatever I get for b over 2 squared, that result I want to add that to both sides. Then I want to factor. At this point you should have a perfect square trinomial. If you can't remember, if you're not sure about how to factor perfect square trinomials, please see my video factoring perfect square trinomials. I think it's maybe a 4-minute video, and I'll link it in the bio of this video here. Alright. After you factor, you want to simplify the right hand side. So basically you're going to add or subtract on the right hand side. Take the square root of both sides, and then last you're going to separate that equation into two separate equations to get your two answers for your quadratic equations. And I have if necessary, and I'm going to show you why in one of my problems here. Alright, but let's start with the first one. So my first step, we want to write our equation in this form. So basically I want to move my c or my constant to the other side. So since that is a negative c, I'm adding c, or I'm adding 15 to both sides. Alright, so I'm rewriting it. That is x squared plus 14x is equal to 15. I'm going to leave some space here and you're going to see why in a minute. Alright, so I've done step 1. Find b over 2 squared, or b divided by 2 squared. You could put it with your work here, but I like to actually do it mentally or just do it on the side, so that way my work doesn't get too cluttered. So let's go ahead and just write it out on the side, and you'll see that you can actually do this piece mentally. So b, of course, is 14 because that's the number in front of my x, or by coefficient. So that is going to be, let me just use a different color here. 14 over 2 squared. 14 divided by 2 is 7. 7 squared is 49. Alright, so you may get to the point where you could do it mentally. You could say, okay, b is 14. 14 divided by 2 is 7. 7 squared is 49. So I just wrote it out on the side here for you to see that. And then I want to add that to both sides. So this 49 here, I'm going to add it to both sides. So plus 49 plus 49. Alright. Then I want to factor this perfect square trinomial and simplify the right hand side. So when I factor this, it's just going to be x plus 7 squared. Simplifying this is going to be 15 plus 49 is 64. So now remember, to factor perfect square trinomials, you simply take the square root of your c. So the square root of 49 is 7. Whatever variable that you're using, in this case is x, so that would be x. And whatever sign you see here, so since that's a plus, you have a plus here. If it were a minus, you would put a minus here. So that's just how you factor perfect square trinomials. So we've done that, and we've simplified the right hand side. Next, I want to take the square root of both sides. So we're going to take the square root. And remember, when we take the square root of something already raised to the second power, it simply gets rid of that 2 there. So I'm left with x plus 7 equals the square root of 64 is positive and negative 8. Alright. Now I want to separate my equation. So I'm going to show you two ways. You could write it as two separate. I'm actually going to change colors here so you can see. You can actually separate it into two one-step equations. That would be x plus 7 is equal to 8, and x plus 7 is equal to negative 8. Put a negative up here because that's a positive and a negative 8. Alright. Then I just solve these one-step equations. So subtract 7. 8 minus 7 is 1. And subtract 7. negative 8 minus 7 is a negative 15. So my answers are 1 and negative 15. Alright, so that's one way. The other way, and I don't think any one way is better, it's just whatever you prefer. You could, at this point, isolate your variable. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 7 from both sides. So I'm left with x equals negative 7 plus or minus 8. Mentally, I would say negative 7 plus 8, that is, well, I'm actually going to write it out, but if you can do it mentally, go ahead and do that. Negative 7 plus 8 is 1. And then you could say negative 7 minus 8 equals negative 15. So what do you know? You get the same answers. So it's just whatever is your personal preference. Either way, you're going to get the same answer. And so we have solved this quadratic equation by completing the square. So let's try another problem solving this equation by completing the square. And in this case, I'm not going to get two whole numbers. So that's why I put if necessary for number 6. I'm going to show you 2 ways that you can actually write your answers. All right. So for this one, again, moving c to the other side. So adding 2. I'm left with x squared minus 2x equals 0 plus 2 is 2. All right. Finding b over 2 squared. So b here is negative 2. So negative 2 divided by 2 squared. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. And negative 1 squared is just 1. So I'm adding 1 to both sides because that's my b over 2 squared. So plus 1 plus 1. Now I'm going to factor this perfect square trinomial. Remember, we just take the square root of my last term. And since that's a minus, that's going to be x minus the square root of 1 is just 1. And 2 plus 1 is 3. So I factored, simplified the right-hand side. And I forgot my 2 here. So that should be x minus 1 squared. And then I'm going to square root both sides. Alright, we'll take the square root of both sides. It's going to get rid of that 2. X minus 1 is equal to positive and negative square root of 3. 3 is not a perfect square, so I'm just going to leave it under the radical. Of course, if you could write it in simplest radical form, you would do that, but I'm leaving the 3 under the radical because I can't simplify that anymore. And then, so I could separate it into 2 separate equations. So at this point, x minus 1 equals positive square root of 3. Why am I putting 15? I don't know. And we don't put plus. And then x minus 1 is equal to negative square root of 3. So I could add 1. That would be x equals 1 plus square root of 3. That's one of my answers. Again, adding 1. X is equal to 1 minus square root of 3. And remember, you cannot combine these because they are not like terms. My 3 is under the radical, so I have to leave them separate. All right. So that's my answer. 1 plus square root of 3 and 1 minus square root of 3. Or you could do this. If you want to write it all as one piece, add 1, add 1. Isolate my variable. So that's positive 1 plus or minus square root of 3. And you could leave it like that. So depending on how your teacher prefers the answer, or if you're taking a test, how they want the answer, you could either leave it like that or separate it into 2 separate answers. But either way, 1 plus or minus the square root of 3 is the same as 1 plus square root of 3 and 1 minus square root of 3. So we've solved this quadratic equation by completing the square. Alright, so the last problem I'm going to show you before I have you try one of your own is a problem where you don't have a 1 for your a. So as you can see here, we have a negative 2 for a. So the only added piece, if your a is not 1, you want to divide everything by a. including what's on the right hand side of your equal sign. So since my a is -2, I'm going to divide everything by -2. I'm just going to put one -2, so in a huge fraction bar. So -2 x squared divided by 2 is just x squared, which is what you want. 12x divided by 2, since it's positive, that would be plus, no, 12x divided by -2 is -6x. All right. -20 divided by -2 is a positive 10. And 0 divided by -2 is still 0. Again, if you had a number there, you will still just divide it. All right. Now, I have the equation where I have my x squared by itself, or just 1. And then I just follow these same steps. So, and I'm going to get a different type of answer, so pay attention. I'm going to subtract 10, which is my c. X squared minus 6x is equal to -10. So I've done step 1. Find b over 2 squared. My b is now -6. So -6 divided by 2 squared. -6 divided by 2 is -3. So -3 squared is 9. So that's going to be plus 9 plus 9, because I'm adding that to both sides. And if you haven't noticed the pattern here, you should always get a perfect square to add to both sides, because you're raising that number to the second power. So if you don't get a perfect square that you're adding to both sides, you should know that you've done your done this piece incorrectly. All right, because we want to create a perfect square trinomial to factor. So the square root of 9 is 3. Since this is a minus, that's going to be x minus 3. -10 plus 9 is -1. Just going to erase this to, well, I'll leave it. And again, got my 2 there. So x minus 3 squared equals -1. So I factor and simplified the right hand side. Now I want to take the square root. And you may have already noticed what is going to happen. X minus 3, that 2 goes away. However, we cannot take the square root of a negative number and get a real number. So we can stop right here and say that this problem has no real solution. And so the solution to this equation is that there is no solution. So we've solved this quadratic equation by completing the square. Alright, so I would like for you to pause the video and try this problem on your own, and you're probably looking at it and you're like, why did she give us the hardest problem, or the problem that looks differently to try on our own? But you're smart, you'll figure it out. Go ahead and pause the video, look at what is here and what is here, okay? Make it look like this for your first step, but go ahead and pause and try this problem on your own. Alright, so for the answer here, you should have gotten x equals -3 plus or minus the square root of 5. So if you got it correct, great job. If not, continue watching. I'm going to kind of go through my steps here. So my first step was to divide everything by 4, because my b was not 1. So I divided everything by 4. So 4x squared divided by 4 is x squared. 16 divided by 4 is 4. -24x divided by 4 is -6. But we still don't have it like we want in step 1. My c is on the left hand side, but my b is on the right hand side. So I have to flip them. Remember, when you move anything across the equal sign, you're going to use inverse operations. So since this is a positive 4, when I move it to the other side, I subtract. That becomes a -4. Since this was a -6x, and when I move it to the other side, I add it. So that becomes a positive 6x. So now we are at step 1. All right. Same steps. I want to find b over 2 squared. My b was 6. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. Adding that 9 to both sides. Factoring. So taking the square root of 9, which is 3. This is a plus, so I bring down my plus. And -4 plus 9 is 5. Take the square root of both sides. That 2 goes away. I'm left with x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 5. I can't simplify that 5 anymore, so I subtract 3 from both sides, and I leave it as negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 5. So if you didn't get the answer, hopefully you were close and you understood your mistake. If not, just pause the video and analyze my work a little more. All right, but if you got it correct and you understand it, I want to thank you for learning with me.